Think about the last time someone asked for your honest opinion, and you gave them something softer. Not a lie exactly, just less. You smiled, you nodded, you said something kind, something careful, and something that left the other person feeling fine. And the whole time, your real thought sat quietly in the back of your throat, waiting for a moment that never came. You drove home, you replayed the conversation, and somewhere in the silence you thought, why didn't I just say it? If that has ever happened to you, and for most people it has happened more times than they can count, this video is going to explain something about you that the people closest to you have probably never taken the time to fully understand. Because this pattern, this very specific habit of swallowing what you actually think while offering the world a calm and easy expression, is not random. It is not weakness. It is not cowardice. It is the result of a deeply intelligent system, your own mind, doing exactly what it was trained to do, and understanding that one thing might be the most clarifying, most relieving thing you do for your relationships, your mental health, and that quiet internal tension that has probably been sitting inside you for much longer than you realize. There is a kind of person who moves through the world with a particular kind of warmth. They are the ones who listen without interrupting. Who remember what you mentioned 3 weeks ago in passing? Who never seem to create drama, never seem to push back hard, never seem to be the source of any real friction. People like them. People lean on them. People invite them back again and again because being around them feels easy and uncomplicated. And most of those people have absolutely no idea what is actually going on inside them. Because behind that calm, behind that easy smile and that generous attention, there is a mind running constant quiet analysis. They notice when something is off in the room. They clock the contradiction in what you just said. They have already worked out the flaw in the plan being excitedly pitched to them. They have an opinion, often a precise, well-reasoned one, and you will never hear it unless they choose to give it to you deliberately. And they almost never do. Not because they don't care, not because nothing registers, but because the moment between having the thought and speaking it is where everything gets complicated. Society tends to respond to this kind of person in one of two ways, and neither one is particularly fair. In the good times, they are seen as easygoing, emotionally mature, a stabilizing presence that everyone quietly depends on. But when the distance between what they've been saying and what they've actually been thinking finally becomes visible, and eventually it always does, the labels shift. Two-faced, passive-aggressive, hard to read. The very person who spent years absorbing tension and protecting the comfort of people around them suddenly becomes the villain in someone else's story. Neither of those versions is accurate, and that is precisely what this is about. This is about the psychology of people who hide critical thoughts behind a smile. Not because they are dishonest, not because they are calculating, not because they are performing something false, but because somewhere in their development, their nervous system learned a very specific lesson. Honest expression is a gamble, and the cost of losing that gamble is higher than the cost of staying quiet. There is a term in psychology called emotional suppression, and research out of Stanford University found something that challenges almost everything people assume about this behavior. People who regularly suppress their emotional responses, especially critical or negative ones, do not actually feel less. They feel the same intensity as everyone else, sometimes more. The critical thought lands just as hard. The frustration is just as real. The disagreement registers just as sharply. The difference is that their regulatory system has become so well trained, so automatic, that it intercepts the feeling before it ever reaches expression. The smile is not a mask they consciously choose. Over enough time, it becomes a reflex, a neurological habit so deeply grooved that it happens before any deliberate decision is made. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the region governing social reasoning, consequence prediction, and impulse regulation, is in constant conversation with the amygdala, which processes threat and emotional signal. In people who grew up in environments where expressing a contrary thought led to conflict, withdrawal, cold silence, visible disappointment, or emotional unpredictability from the adults around them, the amygdala begins to associate critical expression with danger. Not danger in the abstract, real, experienced, repeated danger. The kind that a child's nervous system catalogs and builds rules around. And because the brain is the most efficient pattern recognition machine in existence, it learns fast. Keep the thought in. Find a softer word. Smile. Keep moving. This is not a choice that gets made consciously every time. It becomes the default setting. And to understand why it becomes the default, you have to go back further than adulthood. Most people who carry this pattern did not develop it at 30 or 25 or even 20. It started much earlier in environments that had no room for a child's full inner life. Maybe there was a parent whose moods were unpredictable, which meant reading the room was not a social preference. It was a daily necessity. Maybe they were the child who became the emotional referee between adults who should have managed their own conflict. Maybe every time they voiced something real, a frustration, a disagreement, a preference that went against the grain, it either started an argument, created visible tension, or was simply dismissed as though it had never been said. So they stopped voicing it. Not because they agreed, not because they stopped thinking, because they were economizing. They were spending their emotional energy where it would actually land and letting the rest go quietly underground. This is not dysfunction. This is adaptation. This is a nervous system doing its job in an environment that demanded something specific from it. The tragedy is not that it developed. The tragedy is that it rarely gets updated when the environment changes. And here is what makes this pattern genuinely difficult to untangle. It works. For a long time, it works beautifully. The person who has learned to hold their critical thoughts close is often described as one of the easiest people to be around. They regulate, they smooth, they absorb friction before it becomes conflict. Relationships feel easier in their presence. Workplaces run more calmly. Social dynamics stay balanced. People lean on them without ever fully understanding why. But the hidden cost accumulates slowly, in a way that doesn't always have a name until it gets too heavy to ignore. This person almost never feels fully known. There is a version of them, the version that notices, that evaluates, that has quiet opinions about everything happening around them, that almost nobody gets access to. And after years of that gap growing between who they appear to be and what they actually think, a very particular kind of loneliness starts to form. Not the loneliness of isolation, the loneliness of invisibility, of being in rooms full of people who only know the version of you that you decided was safe to show. There is also a counterintuitive dimension to this that almost nobody talks about. These individuals, the ones who hold their critical thoughts back, are frequently among the most perceptive people in any room. Because they have spent years watching instead of performing, listening instead of talking, absorbing instead of projecting, they develop a read on human behavior that is genuinely uncommon. They see what is happening beneath the surface of a conversation. They track the micro shifts in tone and body language. They identify the flaw, the contradiction, the unspoken dynamic, long before anyone else has named it. The thought they are sitting on is not a reaction. It is usually an accurate diagnosis. The cost is not that they think too critically. It is that they trust their own perception too little, or feel too unsafe, to let it be heard. There is no judgment in any of this. There is no implication that one way of moving through the world is more enlightened than another. Some people externalize everything immediately. They process out loud. They say the hard thing in real time. They let it land wherever it lands. Some people internalize everything. They process quietly. They hold it. They wait. Both are answers to the same fundamental question every human being is trying to answer from the time they are small. How do I stay connected to the people around me without losing myself in the process? Neither answer is wrong. They are just different architectures, built in different conditions, for different original purposes. But if you recognize yourself in this, if you have spent years nodding when you wanted to push back, laughing when something genuinely sat wrong with you, choosing the soft word over the true one because the alternative felt like lighting a match in a dry room, then there is one thing worth trying. Not an overhaul, not a confrontation you have been avoiding for 3 years, something smaller and more forgiving than that. Start with low-stakes honesty. The next time someone asks what you think and you feel that familiar pull to soften it, try giving them 10% more of what is actually true. Not everything, just a fraction more than you normally would. Notice what happens in the seconds after. Notice that the other person does not fall apart. Notice that the relationship does not fracture. Notice that you are still standing. The nervous system does not change through inspiration. It changes through repeated lived evidence that a new behavior is survivable. That is how the pattern starts to loosen, one small instance at a time. Not dramatically, just consistently enough that the brain begins to update its threat model. You are not broken for being this way. You are not fake. You are not performing something dishonest every time you choose silence over confrontation. You built something. A way of existing in the world that kept you safe, kept relationships functional, and kept you moving forward in environments that did not always make room for your full self. That is not a failure. That is intelligence. And the same mind that learned to protect you by going quiet has everything it needs, given the right conditions, to finally speak. If this landed somewhere real for you, if it felt less like learning something new and more like having something you already knew finally named, there is more. The way you protect yourself, present yourself, and process the world around you goes deeper than one pattern. And the next piece of it might be exactly what you have been waiting to understand.